Okay, welcome. Just looking for the video, and when I get the okay. All right, welcome everyone to today's special joint meeting between the City Council, General Plan Advisory Board, and our Planning Commission Board as well. Being held here at the Veterans Building. It's Tuesday, February 23rd, 2016 at 4 o'clock. Welcome everybody. The purpose of today's meeting, study session, is to educate the City Council, General Plan Advisory Committee, and our Planning Commission about the public process over our 2-year journey that we're going to be going through the process of embarking on updating our general plan and local coastal plan. I'd like to start by establishing a quorum of the council. All members are present, and then I was going to turn to our chair of the Planning Commission and the General Plan Advisory Committee chair to establish a quorum and identify who's present and not.
Mayor Irons, the Planning Commission has a quorum. All members are present other than Commissioner Sadowski, and the General Plan Advisory Committee also has a quorum, all members being present.
Okay, great. And since most of the public is familiar with the Planning Commission and our council, maybe it'd be a good way to introduce our General Plan Advisory Committee. If you could just introduce yourself by name through this presentation, and then we'll go into the presentation. And Susan, if you can start off, please.
I'm masquerading as Melanie today. Melanie Smith.
All right, thank you. Thanks. That's why we asked.
Jeff Eller.
Thank you.
Rich Buquet. Glenn Silloway.
Susan Stewart.
Jan Goldman.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So I know we've got a little bit of an agenda on the table. I was just going to outline the flow of today's meeting. I was going to turn to our city manager to do the opening introductions of our Michael Baker team, consultant team, and then at which time we'll go through the presentation. Following the presentation, if we could hold our questions until the conclusion of the presentation. And thought we'd try something new to try to get through all the question and answers. We'll look to do a couple questions from council, and then we'll rotate to the General Plan Advisory Board, and then the Planning Commission, and then we'll rotate back up to the council, and we'll go through kind of a round robin rotation of questions. And I'll look to our consultant that's doing the presentation to help us coordinate all the questions as we go through that. And then once we conclude with our question and answers from the board, I'm going to be targeting 5:30. And so if we can, at some point, I think we'll look for 5:30 to conclude all the Q&As. Then we'll open it up for public comment for about 15 minutes, and then we'll bring it back to the bodies, and if there's any closing remarks, and then we'll look to adjourn the meeting at about 5:50, and that'll give us some time to transfer from this meeting to the city council meeting. So with that, I'll introduce, have our city manager introduce our consultant for the presentation.
Great, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and boards and commissions. So while the wheels of government often turn a bit slowly, they do turn. So I think it's worth taking 30 seconds to look back and say it was a year ago about that we sat here and you, the City Council, made the general plan and local coastal plan update for the first time in 20 to 30 years here in Morro Bay a priority for this year. And then in April, May, June, you budgeted the money to do this. And then we went through a process with a consultant team to really get a plan for the plan. And you'll recall that in last early fall, we went through a plan for the plan process to figure out how we wanted to do this significant project. Then you appointed this wonderful General Plan Advisory Committee that's seated here to help guide us through this process as a community. And then they and you selected Michael Baker International as the consultant to help us write this plan over the next 2 years. And we're sort of shooting the starting gun today, and here we go. And as we shoot the starting gun and are pushing off on a major effort for the city, a wonderful effort for the city, we all thought it was important to get these three committees or boards together really for Michael Baker and Scott and his team to educate all of us on what's going to happen over the next 2 years so we all know what to expect. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to make a couple comments and introduce the team.
All right, thanks, Dave. So as Dave said, this is kind of the kickoff to the general plan update, LCP update process. Finally, we're here. It's been, I think, a long time coming. We've had a lot of planning effort that's gone into this to this point to finally get it started. And so that's what we're doing here this afternoon is really kind of doing an introduction of the consultant team, Michael Baker International, and then getting a little outline of what the process entails. And then they have some questions for the different boards in the council. So there's some dialogue that can happen as a result of this, and they get some input from all of you. I think with that, I'll introduce the consultant team. It consists of the members that are here anyway, are Tammy Seal, Chris Reed, and Jeff Henderson. Tammy, you'll remember, was the one that was the last person sitting in the audience the day we authorized the contract. It's sometime around midnight-ish or maybe later, I don't remember. So anyway, with that, I think we'll have Tammy, I guess, get up and start the presentation.
Well, I was pleased to, thank you very much for bringing us here today. I was pleased to come back at 4 o'clock this afternoon so that our team can talk with you more about the general plan. So I will serve as the project director, and I have the privilege of turning you over to Jeff Henderson, our project manager, and then Chris Reed, our assistant project manager. They're going to guide us through the presentation today.
Thank you, Tammy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to help launch this exciting effort to update the general plan, the local coastal plan, and the zoning ordinance for the city of Morro Bay. It's a real pleasure to be here after all the work that's gone into everybody getting to this point. So we share that excitement that you all have in terms of moving forward with this great work program. We covered our introductions, and what we're going to do this evening is provide a little bit of an overview of the work plan that we have proposed, and as the city manager indicated, essentially kick off this effort. And then at the end of our discussion, what we propose to do is we've got, I think, 4 questions identified that we want to essentially kind of launch the overall discussion that you will have in providing input to us with a handful of questions that will be very useful for us to understand all the diverse perspectives with regard to these questions as we move ahead. So in terms of thinking about the future of Morro Bay, this is a community that, our understanding is that the story of Morro Bay is really one of resiliency in the face of lots of different challenges, in the face of social concerns and issues and being able to be responsive to those, in the face of environmental concerns and the ability to stay resilient to environmental challenges that may affect the future of the city. And particularly now, as we move forward in an era of potential climate change, we've got issues to address to remain resilient to environmental challenges that may result from things like increasing sea levels and the ability to adapt to changes in the natural environment that are directed by or caused by climate change. And the interesting thing is, when we think about the perspective of a community and its ability to essentially grow and achieve its goals over time, kind of nothing new. This is a community that has risen to challenges repeatedly in the past and will continue to do so in the future. And one of the big goals of this plan is to essentially identify what are the important assets in the community. What is it that the community treasures? And what are the necessary pieces to advance the economy and achieve the community's goals for 20 to 25 to 30 years? We take stock of those things, and then we establish goals and objectives and priorities and policies and a work plan to assist you to get there and to remain resilient in the face of a new generation of challenges. And that's what makes this work really exciting, is the ability to identify what are the strengths of the community and how do we maximize those to stay resilient in the face of future challenges. The core components of the general plan update are outlined in the proposal that we'd prepared. They're outlined in the work plan that was prepared roughly a year ago. And I think at this point, all the bodies that are present here have had a chance to read that and review it and be very familiar with it. So I'm going to highlight very briefly the components of the work program, beginning with our community engagement effort. The community engagement is a fundamental component of doing a general plan update, a local coastal plan update, and a zoning code. We really take the perspective that the residents and businesses present in Morro Bay are the real experts about the community. Our role as a consultant team is to bring a lot of knowledge about how these plans work and what makes strong plans in different environments, as well as to bring a good understanding of local conditions from the staff that are present in the local area, and to assist you in defining the goals and objectives of your plan. So that community engagement component is extremely important. And we begin this process by linking up with the city voice process that the city has already engaged in to provide community feedback, to leverage some of that input, and then work forward toward a vision, which is really the first key piece, the first key deliverable of the process is a community vision. And then throughout the process, we'll have a very grassroots-oriented community engagement process. We believe very much in the philosophy of meeting people where they already are and attending community events and getting feedback in that type of a fashion, as opposed to throwing lots of workshops. Because oftentimes workshops can be, sometimes you have them and you do everything you can to get people to attend, and sometimes they don't. And so often it's a very good strategy to either pair those workshops with the going out into the community perspective, or to solely reach forward by going out into the community. So we'll be engaging in that throughout the course of the process. The community vision that I alluded to earlier is the first piece of this work program, and it's essentially an effort to describe what is the community of Morro Bay like in 25 years from now, and to write a statement that explains the values of that community in 25 years. And to look forward and to not necessarily be limited by the constraints that we may have present today. And to really identify what's the vision of this community in the future. As I mentioned before, we're going to be using the City Voice information as a launch pad for that, but that's not the only piece of information. We're going to take a lot of what we're going to hear in our discussion tonight and the various questions and comments that you have tonight as well in formulating that draft vision. And that vision is the first work item that we'll be taking to the General Plan Advisory Committee at our March meeting, is to bring forward the initial pieces of a draft vision and have a dialogue with the General Plan Advisory Committee regarding components of that vision that have high priority and should be emphasized, as well as to collect additional input from the committee regarding the content of that vision. So once we have that vision established, we're going to move forward into defining the plan. First, we're going to start with the general plan. And the general plan is the community's long-range plan for predominantly two key aspects of community development. Development, which we would address through what we're proposing to call the blueprint, and conservation, which we'll address through what we're proposing to call the green print. The two plans taken together provide the framework for Morro Bay's 25-year plan for development and conservation, which essentially meet the goals of establishing a general plan for the future. This ultimately is a policy document that expresses the city's priorities with regard to those very important topics. It's essentially it's a document that consists of existing conditions information or context for the community, that identifies those assets that I'd mentioned earlier. What are the important things out in the environment that we need to take stock of and preserve or enhance for the future? It will have goals and policies that outline how the city approaches important decisions to maintain or enhance those assets over time. And it includes implementation, or a work program that the city can use in an annual budgeting process to say, our general plan said we need to knock off these 5 or 6 work items over the course of the first 5 years. How are we doing on those, and are we allocating the resources necessary to support the vision that we developed? So that's ultimately how the workable general plan goes forward. Another key piece of this project is the local coastal program, which the city is required to adopt under the California Coastal Act. That local coastal program essentially addresses such topics as the public's right to access the beach, to access the coast, and preserving resources near the coast, providing access to the public to the coast, and adapting to potential environmental changes or threats associated with being in a coastal environment. Adopting that local coastal program essentially allows the city then to assume the responsibility of processing coastal development permits, which are required for certain types of development in the coastal zone. That document is comprised of two parts, essentially a coastal land use plan, which will be a part of the blueprint and greenprint document. So again, that component of the local coastal program comes into the confines of the general plan. The other component is what's known as a local implementation plan, or the zoning that backs up that coastal land use plan. That will be addressed as part of the comprehensive zoning code update that will be being prepared. So the project that we're embarking on essentially accomplishes the goals both of California General Plan law and the California Coastal Act. And we're designing a process that meets the requirements of both with one document. So that's the second component, is the local coastal program. The third major component of this work program is a zoning ordinance update. And that was something that was deemed to be an important priority by the council at the point in time that you approved the contract. So that piece will follow a little bit later in the work program, once we've got the key policies and approaches identified for the general plan and the local coastal program. We'll follow through with the zoning code provisions that implement those. It'll be important for us to have a good, clear vision of where our policies are going before we approach those code issues. So that will follow along as well. There's an environmental assessment going down to the lower left box on the screen here. That environmental assessment is required under the California Environmental Quality Act. A program-level environmental impact report will be prepared to address the general plan, the local coastal program, and the zoning ordinance as one project. That document will be prepared and circulated for public review and comment following the traditional California Environmental Quality Act process. And throughout, we'll be managing the project, working with your staff to ensure that the city's expectations are being met, to make sure that we are engaging the community in practical and efficient ways that bring the information we need forward to complete the work program, and that we're coordinating with the parties that we need to, notably the California Coastal Commission in the aspect of the LCP, that we're coordinating in effective ways that advance the city's goals and meet state regulations and guidelines. So I talked a little bit about the community engagement program previously. And with this program, we're really looking to benefit from the local perspective that exists within the city and to provide guidance to city staff as well as to the consultant team on the process moving forward. We've got outlined in the work program a series of activities related to community engagement, and we'll certainly fulfill that scope, but we also remain flexible, and we want to be able to be adaptive to community input regarding the things that work and the things that don't work so well maybe mid-course through the process. The process of engaging a community effectively is inherently flexible, and we want to maintain that flexibility going forward. So as we're getting into activities, and we're maybe 6 months or 9 months or a year down the road, if something isn't quite working the way that you'd anticipated with community engagement, we want to know that, and we want to be able to adapt to it, because that's a really key component. If that component doesn't click quite right, the resulting plan isn't reflective of community values. So that's the important thing to really get right from the get-go. And then the various different functions that the council, the commission, and the GPAC serve throughout this process In those functions, you will help us gather input, and you'll receive input yourselves throughout this process. And I think particularly with regard to the General Plan Advisory Committee, this is a group that we really look to you to engage your own networks of folks to gather input and bring it into the meetings that we have and provide that level of input to us to assist in the review of documents and the development of alternatives and ultimately the development of the policies in the plan. From the Planning Commission, and then at the GPAC level as well, we'll be having a series of meetings where we will be bringing draft materials in for review and discussion and potentially refocusing in certain ways or essentially collecting your comments and being able to respond to those in subsequent documents. The results of those GPAC efforts will then come to the Planning Commission and the City Council. We envision doing joint sessions similar to this one, where things like the draft vision or items like the potential land use or circulation alternatives that we may be exploring for the land use and circulation plans or potential policies for the general plan will be brought forward for essentially discussion, and that these are sessions where we're looking for feedback and for direction, but we're not taking specific action on those items at that point. That's reserved for the public hearings at the end of the process. Those interim sessions are really meant to present information as it's being developed, gather feedback on that information, and then progress from one item to the next in the overall work program. And we've proposed a variety of ways to engage the larger community as well, through neighborhood and community group meetings, stakeholder interviews that we'll be scheduling, beginning those meetings both at the neighborhood and community group level as well as the stakeholder level. We'll be working with staff over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks to identify those groups and stakeholders and then begin having those discussions throughout the month of March. We will be building from the existing City Voice surveys and keeping open the potential for doing future City Voice activities to build on the success and the momentum of the initial effort at some key points throughout our process as well. And then the GPAC meetings will be available to us. And all of the meetings, the study sessions, the GPAC meetings, all of it open to the public, and the public encouraged to attend and participate in those discussions. So I wanted to take a minute and sort of break down kind of how all these pieces come together. What do they look like? What is this document or this plan that we're working on and the components of it? And I've pulled some materials from a couple of other communities that we've worked in just to begin to illustrate that progression from a vision ultimately to an implementation plan or a zoning code. So the vision, again, describes a future condition. It's usually something in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 paragraphs. It's often supported by what we will call things like guiding principles that help to outline then the course of the plan. And it's a statement that's written, again, in present tense, describing a future case. So when you read a vision statement, often it will say things that maybe aren't true about the community today, but they're reflective of what we want the community to be 25 years from now. And that's an important kind of first step that really engages people in the process. Is they'll often read it and they'll say, well, that's just not true. How can you say that? That's not supported. And that's actually a really good way of getting people into the process, because it's a way of saying, well, no, it may not be true of our community today, but boy, don't we want that? So that's ultimately where the vision goes. So again, a narrative document, very, very short and future-oriented. The next step we're going to take is to prepare what we're terming at this point a baseline assessment. This is essentially your existing conditions documentation. And so for a variety of topics, things ranging from parks and recreation to infrastructure to circulation systems to potential sea level rise, hazards, and a whole host of other topics. I think we've got about a dozen different topics that we're basically going out and gathering a lot of existing conditions information to describe the Morro Bay of today, so that we have an understanding of where we're beginning in laying out a plan for the future. And the way that we propose to do this is to conduct what we're calling a baseline assessment, which is essentially, again, identifying the key assets and resources in your community and talking about how they either are or may be in the future affected by changes in the environment, in the economy, changes perhaps driven by climate change, and other factors that can influence the potential success of the community. And so we go through a process of assembling those and then ultimately reporting on them in this baseline assessment to describe the characteristics of those assets and how they might be at risk in the future. Because understanding how they might be at risk in the future helps us understand whether we need to enhance them, whether we're simply looking to maintain certain assets, or whether there are things about the future of the community where we really need something transformative, something that really shakes things up. And so that's how we use that baseline assessment. From there, we'll be drafting the blueprint and the green print. And again, the blueprint addressing essentially the development components of your general plan and your local coastal program. So this is where we will address things like the land use policy map, which is then the precursor to your zoning map, where we'll set circulation policies and identify how we describe the ability of a roadway system or other transportation systems to meet the needs of the community. It's where we will address safety and hazards concerns and a variety of other topics that address more the development side of the equation. That blueprint then is paired with a green print where we address more of the conservation issues relative to the general plan. And we start talking about parks and recreation and biological resources, cultural resources, and what it takes to preserve those resources, particularly here, I think the coastal resources being of utmost importance. And how we pair then the blueprint and the green print together into the general plan document. That general plan document itself is comprised of various different maps identifying, again, the community resources and the potential the potential ways in which those resources might be affected in the future, as well as text, the goals and policies. And what I've got here is an example of a goal and policies from a similar community in their general plan that identifies things like big, broad goals. And this example is a sea level rise example, that the anticipated effects of sea level rise are understood, prepared for, and successfully mitigated. It's a statement about, again, the future community with a bit of context and narrative, and then a series of policies. Those policies then are used by the Planning Commission, other commissions, and ultimately the City Council as they evaluate potential proposals. And how consistent are those potential proposals with the policies and the vision outlaid in the general plan. And then ultimately, all of this is brought together into an implementation program. It's not all just sort of future statements and wish lists of kind of what we'd like to be. Ultimately, it needs to come down into a work program that identifies, well, if we want to be that, here are the steps we need to take, the time frames we need to take them in, the departments and other agencies that are responsible for doing these things, and ultimately where the funding comes from. So that's really the intent of the implementation plan. And that implementation concept extends beyond the plan itself into in this work program into the drafting of the ordinance, the zoning code revisions that implement the changes, potential changes that are made to the land use plan, and take the existing zoning code and essentially modernize it in a comprehensive way. How long will all of this take? 2 years. As indicated in the grant agreements that support the work and in the direction that we've received from the City Council, that this is a project that needs to be completed in 2 years. That's an aggressive time frame, and it's going to require a lot of dedication on our part, and we're going to be asking the same of the General Plan Advisory Committee, and the Commission, the Council, and the broader community, that we're all in this together and there's a lot of work to do. And so we want to really get after it and be ready to adopt these documents in the fourth quarter of 2017, which is the objective. So what we've got here is the process diagram that was laid out in the work program. It identifies key deliverables up top, and outlines the ways that we'll be engaging the community on the bottom. And rather than kind of go through that in a lot of detail, I want to kind of move us forward toward some discussion and questions and answers. The project schedule is presented as well in the work program that has us kicking this project off in the first quarter here, that moves us into the preparation of the blueprint and the green print, bringing those forward for adoption again in December of 2017, along with the environmental impact report, the zoning ordinance update and the implementation plan, ongoing community engagement throughout the process, and the meetings and project management that I'd alluded to earlier. So with that, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about getting us started on the vision. And our understanding, and one of the other starting points for our visioning process, is the effort that the council's gone through recently to develop its council goals and objectives. And so we have that effort, we have the City Voice visioning effort to build from, and the discussion that we have this evening, as well as the inputs from the December 2014 visioning session that was spoken of earlier. So these are really the sources for the long-term vision, in addition to broader input that we receive throughout the community. Those goals and objectives that are developed by the council, and we have the adopted 15-16 goals and objectives, and we also have the draft 16 and 17 goals and objectives. Those are important for setting direction, but they're necessarily focused on a shorter term. They're focused more on what can we accomplish in the near term, whereas the general plan is looking often at what can we accomplish in the mid or longer range. And so we'll start from those objectives and then move forward into the vision. And to outline a little bit, again, that the city goals and objectives, the council goals and objectives are typically in that 2 to 5 year time frame. And as I'd mentioned, they should help us inform the vision process. And in turn, subsequent annual goals and objectives will be informed by the general plan. And just to acknowledge the goals that we're aware of range from things like developing the new water reclamation facility, improving streets, reviewing and updating city land use plans, including this general plan and local coastal program, maintaining core public safety services, ensuring fiscal stability or sustainability, supporting economic development, improving city infrastructure, facilities, and public spaces, enhancing quality of life, improving water supply diversification, and improving city operations. As we go through that list, there's a number of those things that, when we think about the way those are worded, in many ways they could be considered general plan level. Enhancing quality of life, certainly something that's almost kind of the vision level. Developing a new water reclamation facility in a general plan framework, that's an extremely important project. We would consider that an implementation of the general plan. So it's a way of just kind of looking at these broader goals and objectives of the council and starting to kind of think about them with a little bit of a general plan perspective. As an example, improving streets being one of the key goals from the previous slide. One of the ways of doing that is through traffic calming. And one of the objectives in the document that you all have prepared to this point is to complete 3 to 5 traffic calming projects at appropriate locations. So that's an example of how the existing goals and objectives work. And again, the focus there is on resolving existing problems. The focus of the general plan is also on resolving existing problems, but the general plan is going to look a little bit broader and say, what are the most important locations to resolve today's problems in the face of long-term growth and development? And so how do you then achieve a longer-term vision? That's more explained in what might be traffic calming policies or programs in the general plan. So again, informed by what's an important issue now, but taking a much longer range perspective. The work program that you have been presented as part of this work effort included 2 different types of issues identification. These were the results of the December 2014 vision session. Issues for the process, ensuring that we're engaging the community in an active way, making the most of grant funding opportunities in management. I should indicate, as I think you're all aware, this program is funded by in addition to city appropriated funds, funds from the California Coastal Commission and funds from the Ocean Protection Council. Both of those latter sources are really directed toward improvements to the local coastal program. So we're really leveraging maximizing the availability of that funding. Making sure that the plan that we create is accessible and it's usable. I've heard a lot of comments about kind of how unapproachable the existing documents are, and that's one of the main things that we're seeking to fix with this update. And then again, getting after this work program in a direct and a rapid way. For the plan itself, there's a series of issues here at the bottom of the slide that were identified through the vision process that was conducted in December of 2014, ranging from sustainability and resiliency, which we're really treating as a key organizing principle or key organizing principles of this effort, through to having a legally viable local coastal program and coordinating with the Coastal Commission, and a whole host of issues in between. So, with that, I'd like to, again, indicate that we have a handful of questions that we'd like to, as we begin to move into a discussion portion of this session, a handful of questions that we'd like for you to consider and to provide input on through the course of your discussion and through questions. And as we get into that part, I might leave this up on the screen as an aid to help with that. But the first is that a lot of this work program is based on an understanding of local issues as they existed in December of 2014. So a little over a year and a few months ago. And the first basic question is, has your understanding of local issues changed in any significant way since that time? Have there been big important changes in the community since that point that we need to elevate to a level similar to the issues that we'd identified in December of 2014? So that's sort of the first question. The second is really addressing that question of how can short-term goals and objectives support long-term vision. Again, thinking about the city goals, the city council goals and objectives as addressing more near-term goals, are there particular goals or objectives that you're aware of that are maybe more short-term in character now, but could or should be leveraged to be a long-term consideration? Third, are there inconsistencies between anything that we discussed in December 2014 and the council goals and objectives as you've developed them now? Fourth, just what recent or planned projects should we be aware of? Are there things that you're looking to accomplish or launch parallel to this effort that you feel we should be aware of and or plugged into in order to ensure that they're informed by, that the general plan and the local coastal program are informed by those projects and vice versa? So what recent or planned projects should we be aware of? So those are four questions sort of that we have for this group, and certainly you've got a number of questions for us that we're happy to respond to as well. So next steps. After we leave our kickoff meeting today, the next key meeting is the first GPAC, or the next GPAC meeting, which is currently scheduled for March 17th. And at that meeting, again, our proposal is to agendize discussion of initial concepts for the community vision and engage the GPAC in further discussion of that in order to push that initial concept vision to a more fully formed vision that then provides the basis for the rest of the plan. And we will be in the process of developing that draft community vision, again, through March and April. That's sort of our first big key deliverable that will be sort of out in the public and available for comment and reaction. In the same time frame, we're going to be busy at work collecting a lot of that existing conditions information to be able to provide a good baseline assessment of the community for us to launch from with the development of alternatives and goals and policies. At that point, I'm available, as is the rest of our team, to entertain questions from the council, the commission, or the GPAC. Thank you very much for having us in today.
Great. Appreciate the presentation. And as discussed earlier, we'll rotate through questions to see if we can go through that. First of all, thanks for the presentation. We're really grateful for our advisory boards, both our GPAC and our Planning Commission here tonight. We didn't get through many introductions. We're just trying to roll into the business of tonight, considering the time. But perhaps we can lead into questions. I'll open up with 2 questions from council, and then I'll look to the first 2 on our General Plan Advisory Board, and then over to the Planning Commission, and then we'll just rotate through and see if we can get through everyone as far as their questions. Matt, if you can start us off, and then Christine on a question.
Actually, I'll pass on that.
Okay, Christine, thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. It's a big celebration today. I think this is a long time coming, and it's been almost 30 years waiting, really, and I think we did a lot of legwork between last year and this year. So my first question for you, Jeff, is could we go back to the slide that showed there you go, just one back. The outcomes of the December 20, I think it's 2 ahead from there. There you are, issues for the plan. So those are the outcomes that came from the December 2014 session, right? Okay, so
Yes.
so that's the first question should be referring to some of those.
Yes.
Okay. And,
Yes.
my eyes aren't so great right now.
I'm happy to read them off.
Would you mind?
You bet. Sustainability and resiliency, brownfield development, working waterfront and commercial fisheries, the circulation system and infrastructure improvements, or infrastructure investments, distinct and compatible neighborhoods and districts, economic vitality, changing coastal conditions, natural resources and amenities, and the local coastal program and coastal commission coordination.
Okay, great. So I am not going to add anything right now to those issues. I think that they're still pretty, things that I wrote down in my notes when you were asking us the question, they're all more or less up there. But I do have a question. Is it necessary, or is it not the right way to do it, is to consider which elements will be in the plan, or is that something that we can worry about after we gather all this input?
Yes.
Okay. I understand.
And just to clarify that response, the scope of work does identify a flow for the general plan update, but it also includes a provision that should the engagement process or the desires of council, commission, or GPAC take us another direction, there's flexibility in the construct of those elements. State law does require that you address topics that are directed into 7 required elements. The structure that we've proposed for the general plan includes those elements as well as a number of optional items in response to those goals. In response to those issues, to make sure that we're according the important issues the stature that they should have in the general plan.
Okay, great. That's really good response.
Thank you.
And lastly, a question that I have just in terms of the engagement. How have you traditionally done youth input? We discussed having a youth member on the GPAC, but high school students move on and their lives are a lot, maybe less static than ours in terms of staying here. So how do you go about doing that to gather youth input, since this is a 25-year plan?
There's a number of ways. One way, if we're thinking about really young youth, one way of doing that is as we're having events that involve adults, we orient them toward families and the ability to provide activities at those events for young children. That has the added benefit of bringing parents into the picture that often might not attend a workshop otherwise. Another way is potentially getting into the schools and providing input on the general plan update as part of the curriculum. In the past, always tried to connect it to the civics courses as a way of bringing, folks who are learning about sort of democracy and how we do things to understand that in the context of development. And then the third component is often something maybe a little more formal if there's an existing youth commission or other local ways that youth are already getting together, and in trying to plug into those, particularly for more folks kind of in the teen years, to really use that input to identify, what is it that makes people want to either stay or leave Morro Bay, and or leave and come back. And that's a really key dynamic to understand, because again, if we're doing 25 years, we need the perspective of the youth who are going to be the people making decisions and pushing the community forward 25 years from now. So I think it's a good question, and hopefully those are helpful responses.
Yes, very much so. That's all.
Great, thank you. Melanie, would you lead us off on the GPAC team for questions? Thank you.
Just some pretty easy ones, I think. The work program and the scope of work hasn't substantially changed since your proposal, so we can assume, as all I've seen is what was in your original proposal.
Yeah,
so,
what was in the proposal is what's in the contract at this
great.
point.
Okay, and I assumed we were going to be talking about it today, and I haven't looked at it in huge depth, so I'll just admit that right off the bat. But we were talking about the public process, and does it go into detail? Do you have a sense now of how you sort of want to lay out the public process? I know that there's lots of options, and I'm delighted to hear that you're thinking broadly about how to do it. It's helpful to know the flow of the process and where we're going to be checking in different ways with different elements of the community.
Right.
So you've already sort of laid that out, or are you still formulating that?
Let's go back to here, and that I apologize. That may not be helpful. This version, although not as graphic, may be more legible. What we've envisioned as part of this work program is, first off, led by the General Plan Advisory Committee as sort of the, we really look to the committee as representatives of the broader community and understanding, the ability of the committee to bring forward broader community concerns. So that's sort of the first part of that engagement program. We have 16 meetings identified, this being the first, and we'll meet again in March. And ultimately, we'll be moving forward, checking in with this group on key aspects of the work program, both the technical work that we'll be doing, as well as feedback on the engagement strategy. And understanding from the committee's perspective, how are the events going? Are they being well received? Are we getting the attendance that we want? Are we getting the reactions and the input that we want? Are there other things we should try? So that's going to be another dynamic of engaging the committee. Another key piece of this will be the website, and we'll be building a page to attach to the city's website that is meant both to provide information about the process to the broader community, as well as potentially to collect information from people in the community with regard to key questions that we have. And often what will happen is in a GPAC meeting, we'll have a discussion, a really good question will come up, and we'll identify that. And that's a question worth getting perspective broader than this room on. And so that's the type of dynamic that will often occur in those GPAC meetings. So the website provides another key avenue for community engagement. We'll be doing the stakeholder interviews and those discussions. And all of the website, the stakeholder interviews and discussions, the neighborhood and community group outreach is fairly front-loaded in the work program. These are activities that we're going to be doing as we're developing and then rolling out that vision. So I would anticipate those are really going to occur between now and, say, September. There's going to be a lot of that activity. Then we go through the process of developing our potential policies and developing potential land use and circulation alternatives. How does the land use map look under different scenarios? And we go through that process with a series of meetings from the GPAC. The GPAC recommends options to the Planning Commission and the Council. The Council provides direction to us. The Council and the Commission provide direction to us on how to proceed. The public process at that stage is maybe a little more oriented around those meetings and having good public turnout at those meetings, in addition to broader in the community input. Going to festivals and fairs and community events and having engaging interactive activities where people are actually, taking poker chips and putting them into buckets to make choices, or posting dots or notes on maps to provide comments, things that are very tangible. We try to couple those with these meetings that we have with the GPAC and the Planning Commission and Council to provide both that formal level of input as well as the informal in the community. So from roughly September through likely December, January, or February, we'll be engaging in that activity. By that point in time, we need to be then launching the environmental process, the CEQA process. So at that point, we will have, before this body, a preferred land use and circulation alternative and a preferred set of goals and policies to provide direction to us to go write the plan and to the environmental team to prepare the EIR. That's a more formal public process that consists of things like scoping meetings and then an additional public hearing at the end. So then as we approach the end of the process, we get maybe a little more formal with the engagement process that's guided more into a public hearing process before the decision-making bodies.
So through the
Melinda, can I pass on the question? I'm watching the clock and
Of
try to
course.
facilitate some movement with other questions. Sorry.
Yeah, no
All
problem.
right. Thank you. If Jeff, if you can go in.
Yes. Is there something we can capture your presentation that you gave just now and take with us to the community? Because I thought it was excellent, very concise, and very informative. I'm not sure that I can do as good of a job as you did in talking to members of the public. Very nice presentation. I have a question about the schedule. As much as anybody wants to get this done in 2 years, I think we all do. I'm going to devote all the time that I can to help that. In looking at the schedule and talking about the March meeting, am I correct in saying that by the March meeting we're supposed to have the visioning input from the entire community, or am I misunderstanding that?
At the March meeting, the consultant team will consider the input from the various items that were in the presentation, the council goals and objectives, the December 2014 workshop, this session, and the City Voice process. We will take that information together and draft what we're kind of internally calling a 65-70% level vision, and bring that to the group, bring that to the General Plan Advisory Committee for discussion and reorganization.
And then at that point, do we start the outreach process, or
Yes.
how do you envision? So
Yeah, that
after
outreach
I see.
process starts to run concurrently.
I see. Okay. And then one, in response to your comment, Christine, the representative nature of this committee, I think it is important to address families, students. I mean, maybe a Cal Poly student. There are Cal Poly students who live and work here who might have some input, particularly with the architecture and design department there. If someone is interested in planning, it might be an opportunity for them to get involved as well. So I'm not sure how that would be implemented, but I just throw that out there as a comment. So thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. I'll turn to Joe from our Planning Commission. If you have any questions for Jeff.
Yeah, I really don't at this time. This is really just an informational meeting for me because many of the previous discussions are really new to me.
Great.
Just listening intently.
Great, Joe. Thanks. Michael?
Jeff, some of our largest landholders are private entities. In the stakeholder phase, are you reaching out to some of these larger brownfield landholders to see if they're willing to speak about what their long-term goals might be?
We have not specifically determined whom the stakeholders might be. That would be a very good piece of input for us, if you feel strongly about that.
The other thing is, in terms of putting this together, there are certain trajectories of legislation that you see from being more familiar with some things like the Coastal Commission. While we have planning staff that are certainly engaged in a lot of these issues, you come from a unique perspective about seeing, where some of these other legal areas might be landing in, 20, 25 years. From my perspective inside architecture, I can certainly see, we're going to be net zero by the time this general plan is done. And so how do we take into account those forward-thinking indices that are outside of the local area so that we don't miss larger trends that are happening?
That's a really good question. I think it's actually kind of about keeping the general plan general. It's making sure that, while we're dealing in this comprehensive way about, just about every issue that we can with regard to development and conservation, keeping our policies and our framework at such a level that it's adaptive is going to be really important. So that we're not, yes, we will have a zoning ordinance and we'll have an implementation plan that can kind of get down to the real nitty gritty. But when we're developing the vision and the goals and the general policies of that plan, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to kind of remember to keep it at a high enough level that it can continue to serve for 20 years, irrespective of things we don't know about yet. So I think that's kind of the way to structure the plan to be able to withstand those changes. And in fact, those changes are actually kind of very parallel to what we were talking about earlier with, is it social or environmental or potential climate change impacts? Regulatory could be considered the same way. Is how do these community assets how are they structured to be able to withstand changes in the regulatory environment as well.
Great, thanks. And then we'll turn to Noah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
John?
A couple of quick questions, and I think I'll just lead by saying that I think the information that was gleaned from the December 2014 workshop is still, I think, very accurate and broad enough to capture most of the individual items that I think would fall under most of those categories. I did ask a question at one of the first council meetings that we had in discussion about the draft plan and how we balance the blueprint and green prints and the timing so that they inform each other and to make sure that one doesn't start to supersede or take precedence over the other, as both seem very important. So you responded at that time saying that you felt very confident that we could balance those. With the blueprint leading, how will they be woven together and inform each other? And just like to talk a little more about that.
Actually, one of the benefits of having taken a while to get to this point is the initial work plan that we laid out in December 2014. For a variety of reasons connected with the funding available to the work program, the timing in which that funding needed to be spent, front-loaded the blueprint, and then prepared the EIR, and then did the green print, and then had a subsequent environmental analysis of the green print. The work program that's in the contract now does the blueprint and the green print at the same time. So that actually has the benefit of potentially resolving that concern, because as we're developing blueprint goals, we're also developing green print goals, so we can ensure that they're consistent.
Great, that's excellent news. Another quick question is, you've probably already heard or been working on, actually we know you have, a number of opportunities have arisen since 2014 where we've identified different, mostly specific plan type options and work programs that we'd like to include in this effort as we talk about the future of the Centennial Stairway, for example. I guess I'd just like to hear from you while we're all in the same room. I know Mr. Graham is doing a great job of tempering our enthusiasm to keep piling on to this really important effort, but also to maximize it. Right. And so if you wanted to talk briefly about how we're going to make sure that we're taking advantage of this effort and actually I think maybe inspire even more participation, because we're talking about some really high priorities for the community. But if you'd like to just elaborate a little more on balancing those things and maximizing our time here.
Sure. And I think the key is with the very specific plans, and the waterfront plan, I think, is another. And kind of thinking about those in the context of the general plan, it's important that, on the one hand, the general plan should be setting a foundation for doing those things. And so it may be important for us to consider, though, I mean, in a way, those are also inputs into the general plan, because they're ways that this council and the broader community have said, this is a really important thing for us to do. So that's actually another good key piece of input for us, because if it's important enough to pursue a specific plan now or in the near future, it's probably important enough to be a component of the vision or one of the really important policies. And in fact, it's a way of essentially saying we're going to establish that as part of our vision or part of our key policies. And look, we have this early implementation that we can pursue. So it's kind of a win-win. And that's very much, I think, the way that we would look at those efforts aligned with the general plan.
And very tangible. And
yes.
I'll end my comments there. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Noah. John?
Jeff, thank you for your presentation. Very helpful, and it is great to be here tonight to start this process and in 2 years from now exactly finish it. My question is this: when you do visioning in a community, often you get idealistic ideas that you have to pare down into some meaningful document and or statement, and then the plan that follows. And the plan is very comprehensive and will lead to recommendations for a number of different types of approaches to achieving what you want to achieve. And I guess the question that I have is, do you get involved, or does your agency get involved with the funding mechanisms involved for consideration of funding the plan over that 20-25 year period that you're looking at? And if so, how do you do that? How do you go about that? You may come up with a plan that is grand and wonderful and fits the vision for a majority of the community, yet is unaffordable. And so the question would be the funding mechanism.
We are generally aware of the funding resources available for different types of programs that you might pursue in a general plan update. Often, some things will be grant funded, and some things, frankly, communities can only afford if they're grant funded. Other things are discretionary items that, you know, a particular council or commission deems important. Those are also in the plan. I think it is important for us, as one of the feedback pieces throughout this project, for us to understand from the community, and particularly this council and commission, how constrained you want to be fiscally. You are correct. There are many general plans and vision documents that are kind of just a wish list. And it's an expression of priorities, an expression of what a community desires or wants, but it's maybe not constrained by the fiscal reality of what it takes to achieve that vision. That's a piece of input that we're going to be looking, I think, particularly to the council to provide as we're proposing concepts in this plan. And I think I'm going to attempt to remember to bring that out as we're having those conversations.
Great.
Because it is important to understand how fiscally constrained you want that to be, and maybe even to divide the things that you have in the plan by those with secure funding and those that are more aspirational.
Great. And my second question and last is, with the many changes that we are incurring environmentally, there are, especially in California, a significant amount of changes in the law that are occurring. So as you go through this process, it's difficult to vision out 20 years what the legal system is going to tell us we can or can't do. But could you just briefly describe how you look at the legal either inhibitors and or issues that may be helpful to us as a community when you consider the various aspects of the plan?
Right, and it's a really good question. In many ways, the content itself of the plan is driven by legislation. So, for example, we are required to look at complete streets as one option, or one example, in making sure the circulation system is viable for all potential users of all types. We're required to consider various different types of natural hazard information. We're required to consider climate change. We're required to consider adaptation to climate change, both greenhouse gas emissions as well as adaptation to climate change effects. None of us saw that coming 20 years ago. Well, some people probably did. But not the majority of folks doing practice really didn't see that coming 20 years ago. And yet here we are. And that's actually a driving force behind what we're doing. The way that the general plan addresses those provisions is to identify, how do we need to structure our planning to respond to current legislation, and to identify at the local level, hey, what's important even for future legislation? How can a local agency affect the drive of potentially the state or the region toward its objectives? So we attempt to respond to the existing regulatory framework while also understanding what's going to be important for the future. Right now, what's really important for the future is thinking about community health. That's an area where a lot of good planning thought has come forward. Health agencies are moving in a particular direction, and they're kind of saying, hey, planners, come on, join us. We need you here. And health agencies have resources. So it's a good match. And it's something to, that's an example where, we're thinking about things that maybe aren't highly regulatory today, but could be in the future. I think that's an example of one that could be really influential for the plan.
And thank you. That ends my questions, but you brought out the exact point that I was hoping you would, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. And we'll turn back to our GPAC. Rich, would you start us off there?
Yes, Jeff, I'm going to echo Jeffrey's comments. Your presentation is excellent, and we'll look forward to have at least some part of that as a tool in our tool belts to be able to go out and engage the public. My question is as I recall from our meeting with your firm to interview you, and then after that we discussed, and I think there was consensus with GPAC that there was an urgent need to expand the contract to definitely include rewriting the zoning code. So I don't recall that because I didn't receive minutes or anything when we didn't take minutes of that one. But so I really am at a loss of whether that is included in your scope of work now, because I'm asking that now because, and I like your upfront loading of the public comment, because having been on the staff side of that before, we're all excited about this, but the public. Picture when we sit in a 3-hour meeting, a lot of people start nodding off. So I think by somewhere in 2017, people are going to be nodding off in the public, and they're not going to be as engaged as we are. So, but what I do know is that to the layperson that I talk to, they don't understand all the minutia of what you're putting together for a general plan. But the things that impact them are the poorly written zoning codes when they go to try to get a permit, or they try to find answers from the staff's perspective or the applicant side. So if we can go out, in my mind, and market and say, have faith, it's coming. We're not only doing this general plan that is probably very complicated to you, but we are also going to rewrite the basic plan that you're going to be able to come in and get your, it's going to be easier to go to planning commission, it's going to be easier to go to everything. So that's a long question, but that's my question about, is that going to be part of the whole process?
I'll defer to Scott on that one. That's a good question, Rich. I did take the direction from the GPAC to the council when we went through the contract authorization, and the council agreed that a comprehensive update of the zoning code was a good idea. The current contract that we have with Michael Baker International doesn't include that specifically, but I'm working on bringing that forward as a contract amendment. We were trying to get them covered and under contract with us before they got in the building today, and so that's something that we're going to be bringing forward in the future.
Thank you. And just one more?
Actually, if I just could real quick.
Sure, Dave.
And then we'll need to budget for that. And I anticipate that it will be a fairly high, very high priority in our budgeting process. So by the time the FY16-17 budget is set, we'll hopefully have a contract that allows that extension and a budget that supports it.
And as ex parte on my part, I did not meet with Scott and Dave before I threw that question out. But my other question is, we're all, I think all of us don't mind doing homework. And so my question would be, before our March 17th meeting and subsequent meetings with GPAC, will you be able to provide us with the draft that you're going to be discussing so that we can do our homework beforehand and possibly even talk to people? And so as we start, not just March 17th, but as we go down the road and we start meeting with public, if we have that input, then we can maybe facilitate by engaging the people we're contacting to come back to you and speak to you intelligently about the questions that we have.
You bet. The way that the interactions with the GPAC unfold is that we typically will prepare a packet for you. Often it's a workbook with blanks where we present information. We provide you blanks to take notes and provide that input back to us either in writing or verbally during the meetings. And those packets will be sent to you in advance of the meetings so that you can review those, collect that kind of input. And then we're also always kind of open to input from previous meetings. Often in working with general plan advisory committees in particular, it's helpful to have your agenda for this meeting, have the materials, be able to react to the materials ahead of time, provide that input in the meeting, and then at the next meeting, have an agenda item for things that came up from our previous meeting. So I think that's an important thing that we'll want to do, is so that, even if in the week or so that you're responding to that stuff before you come to the meeting, you're interacting with people and maybe you had a meeting scheduled with them after the GPAC meeting, there's still an ability to bring that input in and fold it into the process.
Thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Rich. Glenn?
Thanks, Jeff. I want to just follow up a corollary to what Rich was just talking about. You're talking about going, I think, after March 17th into stakeholder and neighborhood group meetings and so forth. And would it be appropriate for any of us to attend those? And would you be, telling us when those are going to happen so we can do that? Or how would you work that?
I think that's an interesting question that I'd like to essentially receive the question. Let's think about it a little and maybe discuss at the March 17th meeting.
And I do have another issue. This is a totally different direction. I'm concerned about the issue of affordable housing. Yeah. It seems to me that it's part of the youth issue, it's part of the family issue. It's about the composition of the city in 25 years. Now, this interacts with a lot of the things that are going on, the neighborhood compatibility, all of those issues for how we zone and control that. Is that issue something that should be distinct in our discussion here, added to the 2014 list, or do you think it's covered in those?
I think it was always acknowledged as a key community issue and priority. Okay. It's attached to a component of the general plan known as the housing element that's actually outside of the scope of this update. So it's not to say it's not an important issue. It's an incredibly important issue. Yeah. And I believe it'll actually probably cross-cut through a lot of our other issues. Yeah. And I'd be looking to the GPAC to ensure that that does happen, because that's an issue of importance to you and to the community. Okay. But there isn't a specific approach in this update geared specifically to affordable housing, because that's a process the city re-engages in every 8 years on a more frequent basis.
So then an issue is how we take this general plan update and make sure that the implications it has for affordable housing or the distribution of the composition of the city is somehow taken into account.
Yeah. One specific way of doing that we typically are dealing with when we're in a general plan update is the land use element. When we're thinking about the potential development capacity of the community 25 years from now, we need to account for 1, 2, maybe 3 housing element cycles, where you're getting your allocations of affordable housing and making sure that we're establishing a more long-range land use plan that's actually capable of accommodating subsequent housing element updates without a whole lot of rezones, because we've anticipated that need.
Yeah. I just want to push just one little bit more and say it's more than just affordable housing to me. It's the composition of the whole community. Because one of Michael's external drivers, the housing is market driven. And, one little bit at a time, you can create a community you didn't want. So that's my concern.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. And in the spirit of time, we're going to look towards Jerry from our Planning Commission, and if you can kick us off and try to keep us on track here for time.
Okay, thanks. You kind of piggybacking in on Mr. Smuckler's comments too. How are we going to handle, or let me preface this, we're going to be getting into zoning ordinances and zoning codes. It seems like we're going to need to get down to the granular level of specific districts or specific plans in specific areas. How is this addressed in your schedule?
Ultimately, it starts with the land use planning and the general plan, and understanding what does ultimately the land use diagram and the general plan look like with the establishment of different land use designations and the distribution of different types of uses at that level. That occurs, I'm going to say probably September, October of this year, we start launching into that process. Once that land use plan is set, the various different implementing zoning districts are determined, and that's likely going to be a process of looking at your existing districts and saying how well do they fit the land use plan that's been developed for the general plan. Inevitably, 1 or 2 districts may fall out, a couple of new districts are created, and ultimately that zoning map has to match the land use map that we develop at the more general stage. That process will occur in tandem with the writing of the plan. So we've outlined a process that gets us toward a preferred land use and circulation strategy that then can trigger the beginning of the zoning code update, the writing of the general plan, the environmental document process, and all of that then is triggered at the same time. So that process of updating the zoning code is really, I think, going to be more in the second year of this work program, because there are a number of things we have to figure out at that general plan level first.
So is there going to be outreach to the individual districts or specific zones during the second year process? And are you going to be looking at previous workshops such as the downtown specific plan workshops that we held in prior years?
Yeah, we'll certainly look to the input that we've received in the past. And then the process for that zoning code update, I mean, there is a specific legal process associated with any redesignation of zoning districts. Proper notification of property owners and the like would take place as part of that public hearing process in the second year.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Dr. Teft?
Great. I'm only going to have one question, and it has to do with what's coming up, which is the community visioning, and some of the general ways that you can do visioning. I think it's pretty easy to get consensus. I mean, support economic development. Enhance quality of life. No, I'd rather have my quality of life degraded, please. But they don't provide much direction. They don't really give a picture of what the city's going to look like in 25 years. And I suspect that when you begin to move beyond those big generalities to say, okay, what does that mean? You're going to find that the city doesn't have a unified vision, that different members or different segments of the community may have different priorities or different visions. How do you meld differing points of view in terms of the vision for the community into a general plan?
Ultimately, that responsibility falls upon the commission and the council. Our role is to collect that input, identify where those areas of potential disagreement may be, draft material that we feel, based on the broad level of public engagement we've received and or any direction from the commission, the GPAC, and the council, move forward in a direction, but identify where there are potential areas of disagreement or just different perspectives. And as we're presenting draft material to these bodies, highlight those things and say, there are alternative ways of approaching this that might meet different community perspectives than what we're perceiving as the general consensus or direction of the community. That then falls upon, ultimately, the commission and the council to make the hard choices. That's the way these processes roll. Inevitably, as we get into consideration of alternatives, and we're talking about individual properties and what they could be in the future, and we're talking about potentially, is it housing or is it commercial or is it industrial? There'll be a lot of different perspectives and a lot of passion around those issues. Our role is to bring all those perspectives together, line them up side by side, show you what we believe to be the comparative advantages and disadvantages, and ask for a decision.
We'll be looking forward to that.
Absolutely.
Great, Dr. Taft. I'm just going to defer my question and start back with the GPAC to make sure we get all those questions answered. Susan.
You mentioned something about the what pieces were needed to advance our economy. And I wondered, the city just hired an economic planning development group, Shaben Concepts. Have you talked with them, worked with them? Will you be? Is that part of the process that somehow comes together so that we're not duplicating efforts there?
We are in receipt of their scope of work and understand the scope of their effort. We will be coordinating.
Excellent.
One of the things that, we again, kind of similar to what we were talking about with the council goals and objectives, shorter term priorities, but things that we need to be able to expand and say, those shorter term priorities are expressing what's important today. That's our starting point anyway. So it's a matter of taking those and then developing what we might consider to be longer-term perspectives
Excellent.
on those same issues.
Thank
so
you.
yes, we're aware and engaged.
Good. Okay.
Thank you, Susan. Jan?
I can't think of any questions that haven't already been answered. So
Thank you.
that I
Thanks, Jan. And then I'll bring it back to council. And Matt, do you have anything you want?
Yeah, I do. My question is about, in terms of public input. And you've talked about these 16 meetings that we're going to have over these 2 years, and this counting one, so we have 15. How do you envision with GPAC, the planning, and city council receiving a more broader public input, i.e., such as social media, the website you're talking about? How will you use that public input to then give to these different bodies and then come up with different suggestions to give to you, which then you in turn will give back to us?
Often what we will do, and this being no exception, often what we'll do is draft, once we've collected input from, say, an event, an event at a community festival, or certain level of input on the website, or a survey run on the website, we write that material up. And actually a practice we've been engaging in recently is to do it as sort of a log. We start at the beginning and we simply add key things that are built into the process and where they're coming from. And then ultimately that's available for the GPAC at each meeting. It's available for the commission and the council at each meeting. It's something that is publicly developed, publicly accessible, maybe just posted right back to that website, that then keeps a record and a running input of the nitty-gritty detail of what we've received. It's incumbent upon us to kind of elevate the highest points and bring to each meeting, hey, here's what we've been hearing in the public engagement process relative to the issues you're considering today. And as we make presentations and study sessions, that's often the first item is, what have we been hearing recently in community engagement? Therefore, here are the issues and questions we'd like you to consider.
Okay, so with that in mind, then that will give the access to not just these bodies being engaged, but the larger public also to follow along in that dialogue. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Great, Matt. Thanks. One of the earlier questions, Councilmember Heading was asking about in regard to once the general plan LCP update is completed and we have basically goals and objectives within that, and how do we fund that? That was basically how we do that. It seems to me right now, as a city, we're setting our goals and objectives, and because we don't have an updated general plan, we're setting our goals and objectives, and we don't have a document to use to guide. So I guess my question would be, short of crafting that to identify funding, is there a way to craft it so it's part of our goal setting process, to inform our goal setting process on an annual basis, and we're not so concerned about funding, but now that we have it, now that it's updated and we've established what the community vision is, we can look to that to start setting goals to complete those objectives as we've all worked together to do. Is that something that is feasible?
That's the intent of a well-crafted general plan, is to be able to say, this plan lays out 20 years worth of stuff that we want to accomplish. So it'll allow the council every given year to say, how much of that do we want to do this year? And
So
what's most important?
short of having an outdated general plan LCP now that we can't reference to, particularly when this is completed, we will.
Yeah,
okay.
That's the intent.
Thank you. And we have 10 minutes left. We can probably go to questions. I'm going to turn to our city manager. I think you might have had a question, and then I'll bring it back to see if there's any other. You were going to do public comment after we get everybody's questions. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Sort of a comment and a question. So Michael's question about, or note about the brownfield sites in the city and speaking to the landowners, I think all of us should be asking our community
Agreed.
What we would like to see. So the two big ones are the 100-plus acres at the power plant, and then the 26-plus acres of the existing wastewater treatment plant. So we're the partial landowner of one, and we as a city can put some strictures in place to define what we want to be, would like to be at the power plant, and there may be some movement on that. So I would ask all of us to be asking our community, at the 100-acre power plant, if it was nothing but a green field, what would you like to see there? With the caveat that it's not nothing but a green field, so there will have to be some economic development, or there would have to be some revenue-producing elements to it that would interest somebody in taking it down. But both for the city in about 6 to 7 years with the 26 acres at the wastewater treatment plant, and perhaps at the power plant, we should be saying, okay, what do we want to have there? A question on vision. Many organizations, some cities have a vision, values, and mission statement. Mm-hmm. The mission statement is certainly separate from what you all are doing, because that's often really a sort of city staff, what's our mission thing. Mm-hmm. Do you see having 5, 7 community values as part of this vision statement?
That can be a dimension of this, yes, if that's direction that you'd like to give us.
Great, thanks.
Okay, great. We've got about 5 minutes for any, were there any lingering questions out there from any of the council members, boards, or anything? Well, thank you. Joe, great, thanks.
So often when you accumulate anecdotal evidence and suggestions from the members of the public, there's such a wide variety of contributions. Is there a mechanism in place somewhere farther down the line when you've reduced the alternatives or the likely considerations to something that they can reasonably then voice their opinion on?
Yes, that's the process. I think I parallel that to the process of moving from a vision down to what programs are we going to pursue next year. That's we entertain that whole breadth of input at the vision level. It becomes tighter as we get to goals, even tighter as policies, and at that point I think it's really at that transition from a goal to a policy where we're making some choices. We're saying we have this diversity of opinion and we've narrowed the direction we want to go to some point, but now we have to decide how precise we want to be. So I think that it's that process of developing those statements that winnows that input.
Right.
Okay.
Great, thank you. And with that, we'll open it up for public comment. For anybody who'd like to speak to this, public comment's open. Welcome. Come on up. Come on up, Marlo.
Hi, I'm Marla Jo Bruton-Sadowski, the Lone Ranger public speaker. No surprise there. I really want to express how sincerely pleased I am that this is happening, and that all of you are here to help our city, protect ourselves from sea level rise, things that are happening. It's crucial to the whole state of California that coastal communities realize the scientific data and the approaching sea level rise and what needs to be done to protect our community as best we can from any threats from that. And I'm so proud of my city for moving our wastewater treatment plant off the beach and getting it away from sea level rise and the floodplain, and how much that will protect our entire community to have that moving inland. And so I just want to express joy that we're finally doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlo. And with that, good. All right, good. Welcome.
My name's Sean Green. I had 2 questions. The first was actually to the GPAC. What are the mechanisms for engagement between yourselves and the public as opposed to the consultants? That's my first question. And the second question is for the consultants. He spoke briefly about the readability of the general plan and how he hopes to improve the overall usability of the document. It seems that general plans in general are fairly destined to be kind of dead documents in 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and I'm curious to what extent what mechanisms can be incorporated into the documents such that it's not only applicable to our budgeting process for the next 2, 3, or 4 years, because if we are investing 2 years or more, 3 or more years into this process of creating a general plan, it seems that there must be some way to make it viable for the 20 to 25 years that it's on paper supposed to do. So I guess, how is that going to make our general plan more than just a static PDF document that sits on a shelf?
Great questions. Anybody else? Anybody else for public comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the boards. And I saw a raising of the hand from Susan. I don't know if you wanted to address one of the questions or not.
Yeah, that one answer would be we all now have city email addresses. So you can go to the city, you can email all of us under GPAC at morrobayca.org.
Gov.
Thank you. And then each of us individually does have that same thing. So mine would be sstewart at morrobayca.gov, and so on down the line. And more than happy to hear from anybody in the public. And I think that goes for all of us, right? Yeah.
Great, thanks. I'm going to respond to the general plan LCP and see if there's any other comments. Great question on that. Once it's completed, then what? It certainly is a living document. And one thing, as I understand it, our housing element by law, that one is updated. That one component element of our general plan is required by law to be updated, I think, every 5 years. I'm looking for a nod to confirm that. So that's just one of the requirements that, there's the need to update that part of our general plan all the time. I think it really behooves the city to embrace what we've gone through. Clearly, we've identified that our general plan LCP is outdated. So through this process, my hope would be, with all the community engagement from our advisory boards, council, planning commission, that we would clearly identify that as a living document, we have to be committed to updating that from time to time. And so it doesn't mean that we're going to be updating this on every 5 years, but there's amendment processes that goes on with a general plan LCP periodically for all the right reasons. Of course, that's a public engaged process that goes through there. But, to a certain point, we do have a general plan impact fee as part of our development fees, and that's there to provide the funding mechanism to go through amendment processes. So, I would just hope through this process that we get commitment from our community and the boards that are here and councils that we continue this document as a living document and don't let it fall too far on the wayside into the 25, 30-year depths, and that we look at it more in the spirit of a living document. Those would be my comments. And with that, we're right at the 5:30 mark, and we'll go to close. And we have our city manager looking for some comments as well.
Can I just say there was a question earlier? We will have a hot topic on the main page of the website in the next day or two that says general plan update and has the slides from this. I'm assuming we can get the slides from you, and the YouTube link to the video of this, and other documents will be posted there.
Okay, great. We were looking to adjourn by 5:45, and we have some time. Is there any closing remarks that any of the boards would like to make? I'll look to our General Plan Advisory Board Committee. If there's any closing remarks, raise your hand, and we can. So, Jeff, you want to lead off?
Yeah, so I just like to respond to Sean's comment. We don't know exactly how we're going to reach out to everybody, but I think the comments that Jeff Henderson made about going to existing groups that are already out in the community, which we may or may not know about, I don't care if it's a car club or neighborhood watch or whatever. If you're in some kind of an organization, you want us to come and talk to you, That's great. So if you could notify us via email of what those groups might be, we will reach out to you.
Rich?
Along the same line, Jeff and/or Scott, would you like us to start throwing you groups that we think that we would like to reach? Or are we going to wait till March 17th to do that? It seems like we could save some time if we all started sending that info to somebody.
Start sending it to us, and that's for all of you. We want to reach out for stakeholders, and so get us who you'd like us to talk to, and we'll talk to them.
Great. Anybody else from the GPAC on closing remarks? Seeing none. Planning Commission? Any closing remarks?
Yeah, I just wanted, I mean, one of the things that Mr. Henderson said that was very encouraging to me in terms of making this a living document is that hopefully it will be crafted in such a way that the general plan and some of the overarching principles will stand the test of time for 25 years, and the more specific elements like the zoning code will be able to be modified and still remain consistent with the general plan. So hopefully there'll be a degree of adaptability built into the whole document, more adaptable at the specific provision level.
Thank you. Jerry?
Real quickly, I just want to let the public know that these are the documents that we rely on to make our decisions. We're not up, when a project comes before us, that we don't pull our decisions out of thin air. So this is what makes these documents living, and this is what makes them so important. So I hope the community comes together and brings their input to these various boards.
Great. And I'll start at the end. Noah? None? John? Matt? Christine?
Yeah, I would like to say that I think it's exciting to think about going through the process with joy. It's very rare you hear that word with government process, so I'm going to keep that in mind. And also I think that many people in the community have been assessing and understanding the need to update the general plan for a number of years. But I really think it's necessary to just take a moment and recognize you, Mayor Irons, because you've really been driving the process, and you've never let us forget that this needs to be done, and it's something that we need to consider in all of our goal setting and all of our budgeting. And I just really appreciate your leadership on that. I think that you've really brought the joy. Well, maybe not until tonight. I didn't think of it as joyous, but just recognizing that you really have been a voice consistently on this council and reminding us to do this.
Right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. It's with that, unless we've kind of concluded, appreciate everybody's work tonight, and our consultants coming out, our staff and everybody, boards, thank you, and we'll conclude the meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.